Okay, I think we are live. Thank you very much to everyone that's joining us for today's webinar, which is Hello Business Advisor. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, Marketing Director at Lace Partners. You will see me on screen, but I'm going to pull myself off screen shortly because I'm not the reason that you're here. You are here to speak to some wonderful guests that we have. Emma Leonis, who is our head of exec. She's our exec director for HR transformation. Get your words out right, Chris. Thank you very much for joining us. We have 32 people joining us, but we're expecting a nice big crowd today. So I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes before we start the general housekeeping, if you like. You've always got to have this housekeeping, but as I have plenty of you that are already logging in as we speak, let's play a little game, and the game is making sure that you can use your chat functionality properly. So I'm sure you've all done this before, because we've done over a year of being locked up and cooped up at homes, and now everybody knows how to use Zoom. But just to make sure that I'm not just talking to myself, can you put into your chat functionality, which you should be able to access via the bottom panel or top panel, depending on how you're accessing Zoom, your favorite color? Let's start with a favorite color, and I want as obscure colors as possible. I've got yellow from Cara, blue from Sophie, pink, magenta, azure, Mark, well played, azure, ochre from Alex, excellent, I like that, lilac from Venetia, sky blue, pink with yellow dots on, Sophie, that's excellent, I'm loving that. Air Force blue, wow, that's superb. I'm loving some of these colors, absolutely brilliant, thank you very much, guys. So we know that the chat functionality works. So let's get into the housekeeping, I think, and I've gone through the chat functionality already. If you would like to download a copy of the white paper from which this webinar is based, the webinar itself is our third webinar that we've run now. And you can get the previous access to previous webinars either via our website, which is lacepartners.co.uk/webinar, and you can see all of the on-demand versions there. We will be doing an on-demand version of this webinar as well, so you can access that. And shortly, I'll also be going live via Facebook, so people will be able to access it via Facebook. I think that's most of the bits that we've managed to get through so far. As I said, I'm not the reason you're here today. The reason that you are here today is Emma. So I'm going to hand across to Emma to introduce our guests. Ems, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris. And great to see so many of you joining us today, and hopefully lots of you will listen to this post today's session as well. So as most of you probably know, if you've listened to our webinars before, some of our podcasts, this is a little bit of a passion of mine, HR shared services in particular. So I'm delighted today to be joined by two lovely friends and colleagues of mine, both Val and Jayne. We're going to talk today really about kind of service delivery in complex environments, so particularly multi-geography, multi-language, multi-service delivery model operations, but also talent. In a couple of our other webinars, we've talked around employee experience, talked around general trends, and also kind of in our February session, we talked about the concept of contact your way. Whilst all that's great, I think one of the things that really came through in those conversations was it'd be really good to think about some of the complexities that a lot of global organizations face, hence the service delivery piece. And also talent. Talent's often, I think, something that we forget, but is really, really important in this context. So, as I say, delighted today to be joined by Val and by Jayne. So Val is head of global HR operations at Aggreko. So Aggreko is a world leader of providing mobile modular power, temperature control, and energy. And in terms of Jayne, Syngenta is a leading agricultural company and agricultural science and technology, producing kind of crop protection products and also seeds. So if you haven't heard of those two companies before, you will hear a lot more today from both of our speakers. So before we kind of dive in, I'll perhaps just ask Val and then Jayne just to share a little bit around sort of your world, the size of your team, some of the complexities maybe, just to whet the appetite before we start talking about some of the conversational topics, if that's okay. So Val, perhaps yourself first.
Need to go first, eh? Okay, sure. So as you heard, Aggreko does temporary power and temperature control. We've got about 6,500 employees and then probably another 2,000 contingent workers on top of that. We operate globally. We're in about 92 countries, I think, currently at the moment. We have in our shared service centre 3 shared service centres, so it's not just one. One is in Dubai, and that covers Asia, Middle East, Africa, and AusPac. And then we have another one in Houston, which covers all of North America and all of Latin America. And then our last help desk is in Glasgow, and that covers the whole of Europe and Eurasia. So Northern Europe, Continental Europe, and Eurasia. So I always describe us as thinly spread, like margarine on toast, because we have, in those 92 countries, we probably have 20 odd countries that have less than 5 people in. Probably, around, I would say, 30 of those countries probably have even less than 10. So really thinly spread, and in some really obscure countries as well. So quite a challenge, which is why we're here talking today, really. So I'll hand over to Jayne, and she'll give you a bit about her too.
Thanks, Val. And to be honest, with Syngenta, we're very, very similar to Aggreko in the fact that we are a global organisation spread over 90 plus countries. We have 40,000 FTE within our organisation, and we're split into 5 regions. The region I look after is Europe and Africa, Middle East. Within that region, we have about 13,500 employees, but our service models are very mixed. So we have outsourced service models with delivery centres. So our English-speaking countries are supported with an outsourced provider out of India. And then the rest of our countries that are within a delivery centre are supported out of Krakow in Poland. We also then have fully outsourced models. So everything completely for HR is outsourced for some of our smaller, more complex countries. And we have in-house models as well. So all the operations are done in-house, but we use global tools. With the fact that we use global tools, and in the Army, we're across 54 countries, you can imagine the amount of languages. Being a scientific agricultural organisation, we have everything from field workers who are planting and cutting in the fields through to scientists. And in Europe, obviously, we have our lobbyists who, sit in Brussels, trying to lobby the European Commission and Parliament for when we need to, get certain legislation through and certain agreements through for our products. So we have a massive scope of the type of people we need to support, which adds to the huge challenge that we have in managing our operations and managing our shared services.
Great, thank you both. And we will delve into some of those challenges and complexities today, particularly as we think about this kind of very big question. One of the first things that I wanted us to cover today, based actually quite a lot on a number of FAQs, Q&A sessions from our previous webinars, was how on earth do you deliver cost-effective and employee-centric services given those geographical complexities that you've talked about? Because clearly we know that business is going to expect cost efficiency. We also know that employees really want that kind of personal feel and more an employee-centric service. But sometimes those two things can be in opposite directions. So you look at cost to the detriment perhaps of an employee experience. So really curious to sort of delve into this, given, Val, 85 countries for Aggreko, Jayne, in the Europe, Africa, Middle East region alone, you've got 54 different countries. So my guess is you've probably got some populations that are quite big in certain countries and then a really long tail, maybe one or 2 people in certain regions or even in countries, language complexities. And also, I think, given the conversations that we've had before, quite a diverse workforce with quite a lot of frontline or field-based individuals. So I'd love to explore this in detail together. So maybe, Jayne, if I perhaps start with yourself on this one.
Yeah, sure. When you asked this question before and you said this was going to be here, I was like, yeah, there's no magic bullet for this. And I'm really sorry if I'm going to disappoint any of the attendees and you were hoping for a really clear answer. There isn't an easy answer to this. what we've done is, obviously customer centricity isn't just a buzzword, it's absolutely vital to the health of your company and your business. So that's always been a key thing for us. However, the balance of cost versus customer centricity is an absolute challenge, What we've done in Syngenta is we've taken our biggest countries and we've outsourced them. And so what we've done is we've looked at where can we get the volumes, where can we leverage in the best way the cost and actually provide an outsourced service to those countries. So we actually have 10 of our 54 countries are outsourced. That's 70% of our population is serviced by an outsourced provider. So we do get a certain amount of cost effectiveness of that, especially when you look at the cost of wages and general on costs, especially in Western Europe and European markets. So we do get some benefit there. The thing is, though, when you outsource and you use an outsourced provider, there is a general feeling from the population, and we outsourced in Syngenta our first countries in 2011. So we're 10 years down the line of having outsourced. It's a really difficult change journey for employees because they want to be able to walk up to someone in the office. They want to be able to talk to the HR business partner or the HR operations team and say, I want to do this. So it's really, really important that your provider is part of your company. So although it's an external company, we work very, very hard to make them part of our team. Because then them being part of our team, understanding our culture, understanding our company, it means that they have a better understanding when they're dealing with our employees. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect in Syngenta. It's not. We always have challenges. You've got to have really strong service management. You've got to have really strong relationship management to make this work. And yeah, we do still have problems. And I think the biggest challenge you have is when you centralize things. So we use Krakow in Poland for our non-English speaking countries, but it's not always easy to get the resources you need with the language capability. And then as soon as you've clustered countries in one country, they don't know necessarily, so Germany is one of our big countries, Switzerland, etc. These guys that come in and they're all, they all tend to be degree level. These aren't sort of low-level admin people. These are highly intelligent, highly skilled people, but they don't necessarily know the nuances of the legislations and the regulations in the countries. They don't know that in our big sites that it takes you like 20 minutes to walk from one end of the site to another. And so it's really, really important how you work together to bring that knowledge in with your outsourced providers, because it's only when you've got that knowledge that you can really start bringing in what we would call a superior service. Because you can sit down and you can tap and enter data and do that, but employees want more than that. They still want the personal touch. And so in order for this to work, we have to work closely with our providers, and that's just for our outsourced people. Obviously our in-country models it's not shared services in that you have it all in one place, but what we have is we have multiple countries managed by one HR team. So for example, in Poland, they look after our Baltic countries. In Egypt, they look after our Middle East countries. So you still have what I would call mini shared services models. You overlay that with your global tools, and we use Workday. And so when you look at a global tool, you might want to localize it for your country, but you can't because it's going to have downstream impacts. So that balance is always having to happen. And the only way that you can really get that customer centricity is by ensuring the service you offer works. And the biggest thing we've learned in Syngenta over the 10 years, and we've been using Workday now since 2018, is you have to adapt. You have to be flexible. You cannot be overly controlled. So you need to work within the confines of your system, But what you do need to do is say, well, okay, we still got a central process, but what is it we need to do to localize? How do we make this better? And actually talking to your employees and line managers about what they need is the only way you can do that.
And I think, Jane, sort of on your points there, perhaps when we come to talk about talent and maybe skills, we can pick up on the adaptability, the flexibility element, because that's clearly from a service delivery standpoint, but then has an impact perhaps on also behaviours and skills. But I'm curious, Val, from your point of view as well, I know you've got a very different service delivery model in terms of kind of more owned end-to-end by yourselves internally, but equally you've still got the same challenge of 1 or 2 people that are in remote countries and need the same level of service ultimately, because people are people with similar needs.
Absolutely. So our model, like I said, we've got three shared service centres, or help desks as we call them, and in each of those there's a team of 5 and a super user that can configure the system. We went live with Workday in August 2019, stamped on my head, trust me. And so what our shared services do is provide a number of kind of services. So they do all the typical data entry, they do all the back office administration, and they support the local teams. So we still have local HR people in country. So we cover the language situation there, but we also use tools like Microsoft Translate. So that helps us be able to communicate, one-to-one with employees, or if a ticket's raised, then we can translate that ticket using various different tools. So we can then reply back to our employees like that. Because you're right, Emma, it's really difficult when you've got one person in Ghana. How do you give them the same service that you're giving 1,200 people in North America that all speak English? So that's the way we try and do it. We use tools basically, and we use the local HR teams that are on the ground that have that knowledge, that have that local legislation understanding that Jane was talking about earlier. So it's a very different model, but the other side of it, I would say, when we went through a transformation, and part of that transformation was implementing Workday and creating the shared services in the first place. We went down the route of employee self-service and manager self-service, a bit naively, I dare say, because the adoption on that is not as high as we would want it to be, and the way we structured and designed the model. So we are suffering a little bit of the lack of that adoption, and the HR teams or the help desk teams are picking up some of those tasks now that you would normally have expected a manager to initiate in the system. So that's something I think you really need to consider when you look at shared services, is what will really be used as a self-service versus and it's not just manager capability as well, because again, if you think you've got one person in Gabon and 2 people in the Congo and 2 people here, their connectivity is a problem, is a challenge. So you can't expect, they would probably go home or go back to the camp, if you like, and then have to do all of the tasks that they would normally do, or you would expect them to be doing in the system. So we're kind of moving our model from a very self-service centric, where we don't really communicate too much with employees, to switching it around now to provide a higher service to those employees, because they've got their own challenges, and we didn't necessarily think about those when we did our original design.
Yeah, and maybe just kind of reflects on everything you've said there. I think for me, kind of that balancing the cost-effective and employee-centric piece is definitely something around, from a cost-effective standpoint. Jane, you were talking around outsourcing made sense because you've got volumes in your biggest market. So, and that always is a cost consideration. Do you insource, do you outsource, etc. I think then really interesting about the translation point, Val, because clearly people want to be spoken to in their own language, but to hire someone that speaks 100 languages, if you've got 100 different countries, it's just nonsensical. So having the tools to do that is a really interesting piece, as well as also drawing on local HR. And all of those actually, whilst being cost effective, particularly the translation piece and using local resources, may make it feel more personal in some respects too, because you're close to the customer, it's in their language, etc. It feels right for them. There's been one or two interesting questions around perhaps technology to support some of the things that you're doing. So Kara's asked a question which is around Workday, and there's always this challenge of out the box, let's keep it truly as global as possible. We all know that that's easier said than done. So I think a question is really getting at, how do you understand what your core requirements are, particularly at a global level? And have you had to do much local configuration, or have you been able to stick to, the holy grail, I guess?
Yeah,
and maybe Jayne, start with yourself, and then Val to add to that, because you're both obviously on Workday as well.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I think we all go into these projects and these transformations with these wonderful glasses on, tinted glasses, and then all of a sudden you realise, oh, actually that's not quite going to work the same way. And with us nearly 3 years in this summer on Workday, we spent a huge amount of time. And I have to say it was an excellently performed project. We had to spend massive amount of times working with each country to understand what the variations were. So, this was focus groups. We shut ourselves in rooms for weeks on end with different country teams, huge amount of spreadsheets, just gathering the information. We did have a core I would say process. So some things were, there was no negotiation, so whatever the approval process was going to be the approval process for the whole of the globe. But what we did have to do is we had to look, and for those of you who are experiencing Workday or any HCM system, to be honest, different countries will have different things that relate to, your base salary, your allowances. It also depends on how much you buy on these HCM systems. So we weren't buying the payroll elements of this. We only wanted the HCM. But in order for it to interface with our big payroll providers, we had to make sure all the details were in there. So we had to do quite a lot of country configuration, but whilst keeping some very core sort of rules and philosophies in place. So in answer to that question, it's not one size fits all, except for things where it's right to do that. And, for those of you who've got experience in different countries, what happens in Germany is completely different what happens in the UK versus what you do in Egypt. So there were some core rules we followed, but then we configured to a country level.
Yeah, and we had a mantra: off the shelf, off the shelf, off the shelf, because we had a previous system that was so highly configured and so highly customized, it just caused us so much pain. So when we were in the dark, dingy rooms designing and creating the system and the business processes, we had a couple of principles, which was, don't customize, or very few customization, keep it simple, stupid, and try not to have too many approvals in the system as well, so things didn't take too long. And we've pretty much stuck by that. I think we've probably only got about 3 custom fields so far in our whole entire system. So that has caused a bit of pain, because people don't want to do it the same. They like, yeah, but we're different. We have to do it because we're different. So we've had a bit of that, and we've always challenged that. If it's legislative, then we'll look at it, but you're not different. Yeah. So within our business process steps, there are some additional steps and some if condition rules for certain countries. So if you're doing a promotion or a demotion or a recruitment, there would be an if condition that if the country had a works council, so if it was Germany, France, Netherlands, then it routes a slightly different way to the HR person so that they can inform the works council, or all the works council members are informed. So there are some nuances, but not customization. That's more business process steps, and adding in additional if condition rules. But other than that, we've pretty much kept true to our word. So
that's great, both. And there's some really interesting questions in the Q&A, which I'm going to hold till the end. Chris has told me not to keep asking them as we go. Otherwise, people will think we haven't got any Q&A. But I'd love to kind of explore that bit around what you do differently, I guess, to make things easier, perhaps when we get to the Q&A, because that's been one of the questions. And I think you're so right, Val. There's something in embrace the commonalities where you can, because sometimes everybody thinks they're really different, but actually when you show everyone what they're asking for, they are more similar than different. And sometimes it's just the messaging of that and challenging the status quo perhaps as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also understanding the impact it has on the system. So, you know, Workday has 2 feature releases every year, and they're continually updating and releasing things. If you've got 92 countries and you've got 92 different ways of doing something, when you have that feature release, then you absolutely have to test all of those business processes to make sure, you know, something hasn't gone a kilter with the new release. So that means your team then needs to be gigantic. You know, your testing team needs to be gigantic to be able to cope with that. So I think once people got their head around the impact of having all of these layers, when really quite simply, we are all doing the same thing, we, you know, just in a different way slightly. And if we can get a consensus and be a little bit more understanding of each other, then it's working much better than it was before. So.
And fantastic. Thank you both. I feel like we could literally spend another whole hour probably just talking about all of that, which is one of the reasons why I did want to pick this up today, because it's such a big minefield of so many different considerations, and there is no one size fits all answer, and every organisation is different. But so we'll keep 1 or 2 of the questions and perhaps come back to those in the Q&A around kind of adoption. There's been one around payroll as well, which clearly is also important when thinking about multi-geography. But I'd like to start to move us on and perhaps talk a little bit more around talent. This is something that's in our kind of white paper, which I know, Val, you participated in actually last year. But in our white paper, we touched a little bit on talent, but it's one of those things that personally I feel, yes, we're conscious of it, but something always gets in the way of us necessarily having the right time to focus on building career paths in shared services, thinking about the talent that we need tomorrow, but planning for that right now. I think, Jane, that's actually something you said, you know, plan for tomorrow today. So I've taken your words and made them my own. And what's really interesting, I think, when we sort of talked about this in our research last year, was I asked a sort of question which was around, what do you think are the critical skills and capabilities, but also behaviours as part of that for success in the future? So for those of you who perhaps are listening and haven't read the white paper, there's a whole chapter around capabilities, and it's called Hello Business Advisor as well, and about changing kind of the perception and role perhaps that shared service teams in HR play. But what was fascinating when I had these conversations, and also from looking at some other research, is clearly operational execution, which is number 1 here, is a given. So in some ways, kind of take that off, because you have to do that to have any credibility. But when I asked around sort of 6 or 7 different dimensions of skills and capabilities, so that included the ones you see here, so operational execution, service excellence, other, and we'll come on to that, data and insights, HR process expertise, and then also I asked around technology and lean and agile. The challenge question I posed was, if you had to rank those in order of importance, where would you put them? And this is kind of how they ended up, basically. So as you'll see, the majority of people said operational execution and service excellence were really important. But what fascinated me was this other piece. And on a scale of kind of rating from 1 to 7, because there were 7 options, 42%, so nearly half of the participants said that other was in their top importance. So they either ranked it first or second out of that list of 7. And the skills on the right, when I delved into that, really came to the fore as things that actually I think we're probably aware of. But my challenge question, and I'd love to explore it with you both, is, are we really focusing enough on building and nurturing these capabilities within our shared service teams today? So the softer side, I guess, of HR, so not just focusing on compliance, not just focusing on process rigor, but actually thinking more about, when I'm speaking to someone, and maybe it's a line manager, how do I coach them through the challenge that they're being posed with? Or it might be an employee. How do I manage change? And as part of that, I guess there's skills around and behaviours around resilience and thinking in the customer's shoes. There's pieces around being dynamic. I think that, Val, actually was something you commented on as part of this. So I'd love to get your perspectives on the left-hand side, I guess, does anything surprise you? Data and insights might be one of those from our conversations before. And then also explore together how you're kind of perhaps focusing on some of these skills if you are, what your talent strategy for HR shared services might be as well. So maybe Jayne, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. I think everyone will agree this is an area that's seriously underinvested. I think we've come from a world where HR services or HR operations are seen as the admin function within HR, not necessarily considered on the same level as other HR functions. For me, when I look at the softer skills on the right of the slide around emotional intelligence, relationship management, these are fundamental to me for service excellence. Because if you don't have these, how can you deliver superior service? How can you deliver service excellence? The problem we have is the world is changing so quickly, you know, problem or not actually, but in order to have operational excellence or you know, good operational execution, that's a certain skill set. Then when you start looking at service excellence and you look at coaching, change management, all these things, that's a completely different skill set. And this is why I said, you know, you need to service for today, but also be looking for tomorrow, because, and certainly this is something we feel in Syngenta, because of the scope of our population, the needs are so wide. There are some people who just want to do things online. They're not necessarily bothered about having the personal touch. So actually, when you're looking at data analytics or you're looking at technology capabilities and potential IA, robotics or other interactions, you need those skills. But actually, you've also got the population who want and need that personal touch. So the big challenge we have when we're looking at, you know, the talent pathways or the strategy is, how do you make sure you've got the right talent in place for today, but also ensuring that they have the capability to adapt and the agility to adapt for tomorrow's population, because things are changing so quickly. And as we've seen from last year with COVID, all of a sudden we had to work remotely. We had to work in a different way. So before, where, you know, you had the rubber stamp and blue ink on everything, it was like, oh, well, maybe we can do this electronically. That's all well and good. Do the people who work with us have the capabilities to adapt to that change in working? Because it is a mindset shift, not only for the people we're supporting, but for the people within shared services. So I wish I could say that in Syngenta we have a marvellous talent strategy for shared services. Where we are is that it's our focus absolutely this year to actually have specific career pathways to show what it is you need to be successful in shared services, what you will need, you know, and like I said, what do you need today, but also what will you need tomorrow, because it does change that quickly for us.
And that kind of career pathway piece is really interesting, because I was reading shared service and outsourcing networks, and if people who are listening haven't heard of the SSON, so the Shared Service and Outsourcing Network, fantastic research and fantastic kind of just place to go for examples. But I was reading one of their State of Shared Services report, I think it's the most recent one for 2021, and clearly that's across functions, so it's not just specific to HR. But picking up upon your kind of career pathways point, there was a statistic in there which said 60% of professionals in shared services tend to have 1 to 3 years tenure, and when they leave, only 45% of them stay within the business. So that isn't just HR specific, that's across shared services. But the main reason for them leaving was better career progression. It wasn't actually pay, it was career progression. So it just strikes me as something that, yes, we know is we need to focus on it within HR for shared services, but it's just a challenge in general. Yeah. And Val, from your point of view, thinking, you know, as Jayne has said about planning for tomorrow, today, what do you maybe see as some of the kind of critical gaps perhaps that you're looking to build within your teams at the moment?
Yeah, so I was really surprised by the white paper, Emma, on that particular slide that you just showed, that data and statistics and analytics wasn't higher up, because I think that's a real skill that's lacking in most HR teams, but definitely shared services. And if you can get that analytics and get it right, you can really make some fantastic decisions and help the business to make decisions, and change the mindset of what HR sometimes is perceived as. So one organization reckons that they can, within a 95% accuracy, using the statistics from the HRIS system, predict the likelihood of someone leaving the organization in the next 6 months. That's really powerful data. So I was surprised that wasn't higher up. And then if we look at some of the other skills on the other side, I think coaching is really important for my team, because they are so helpful. They're too helpful. So and then they end up taking, in coaching terms, they end up taking the monkey on the back. So coaching for us is very powerful, because it's about my team helping and supporting the business to do it themselves. And then that gives that customer service, that one-to-one personal feel, rather than, just telling the manager what to do. And, if you use coaching as a tool, then you get a lot more engagement. And then for me, the other two that ring out there are change management and project management. So we're adopting an agile work mind and using Scrum as a methodology to do that. And we're currently going through a business process review using that mindset and that methodology. So that's been a really important learning, I guess, that my team have had to go through to be able to put us in the right frame of mind, have the right tools, have the right methodology, to be able to deliver that for our customers and make sure our business processes are running right. And we also use the Japanese word Kaizen, which means continuous improvement. So that's the other thing that's kind of always our little mantra that's always stuck up, is always remember Kaizen. It's not everything should be improved all the time.
And that's really another interesting point, because there's the skills side and then there's the behaviors and mindset, actually. And that kind of continuous improvement piece is a mindset as much as it is a behavior. You have to sometimes consciously think, oh, could we do this differently? What are we hearing? And one of the things that came through the report, and it's something that I talk a lot about with clients, is a trait around continuously listening, learning and evolving. And actually, you talked about that at the very top, both, where you're saying we need to be adaptable, we need to be flexible with our service delivery models. Well, that's the same with our own approach to kind of our mindset and our behaviors, I guess. But if we are saying that we kind of want to keep learning and keep growing and keep evolving talent, do you actually think we consciously focus enough on doing that? Because one of the things when sizing a shared service function, for example, is you'll make assumptions around capacity and number of cases that someone might manage, and maybe you'll put in some downtime, so to speak, for personal development for those individuals. But we all know, push comes to shove, the personal development time may or may not be honoured. So I guess for me, there's just something in there around, are we really consciously focusing enough on giving people the time to maybe think about continuous improvement, or to maybe join webinars like this or do their own personal development? Perhaps Jane, what are your thoughts on that?
I think you're absolutely right in that a day-to-day operational crisis or something, the first thing that's dropped, or you've got absence, the first thing that's dropped is development. What I would say for us within Syngenta is development is something very core to our beliefs and our ethos. And so we actively encourage any way of doing development. We're very strong in actually moving people from different functions. So don't just keep it to HR. You bring in somebody, I've recruited someone from IT. No HR background, but they have the right customer centricity and actually it's around data as well. They have the right data knowledge, but they can bring a whole new way of working in. So that's something that's very core to our beliefs and ways of working. Can we do more? Absolutely. But it is about, it goes back to the mindset piece as well, because your leadership and your management have to believe that. Because if they believe it, then they allow the people the time to grow. They allow the people time to develop, whether it's going to work on a project that's not directly related to them. So that, again, this is something we do very actively, encourage people from other parts of the business, whether it's a business partner or, from outside the business, to work with us on improvement. So, the continuous improvement piece that Val mentioned absolutely resonates. So we try and get outside people in, because then they know more about HR and they know more about HR operations. If there might be a COE in Compen or something and have no idea what we do, and that really helps.
And I guess also that might help in terms of maybe changing the perception that there's shared services and there's the rest of the function. And that doesn't exist in every organisation, don't get me wrong, but in some I do know that there can be a perceived divide, like you're here to give us a service, hence you're a shared service function, not necessarily a kind of solutions provider. And Val, kind of what are your thoughts around how you might create a one team culture across the whole of HR? And then I guess, Jayne, a second part to that to come to you afterwards would be including perhaps third parties that you mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, and if I can just touch on that piece around learning as well, Emma, if I may.
Of course, please, yeah.
Interestingly enough, I mean, I haven't got a huge team. There's 17 of us, but we're across 3 different time zones. So we only really get 1 hour in every day when we could all jump on a call together, which is interesting. So, and this is where I'm quite thankful for COVID, believe it or not. It's because when COVID hit and we all went remotely, the first thing that I decided to do was to have a weekly call with my team. So every Thursday at 1:30, we all jump on a call and we either do something silly like play charades, or we use it to learn. And I might bring someone in, we might do a learning course together. It could be anything. It could be sharing an experience or just sharing some knowledge. But from COVID perspective, that gave us that opportunity, and I'd never thought about it before. So we do actually spend a bit more time doing learning and learning for the team as well, which is good. And then how do you create one HR team? Well, I think the business, funnily enough, sees us separately. So they talk about learning as if it's not HR, and they talk about the reward team as if they're not HR, when we are all HR. Does it matter? I'm not so sure it does. I think as long as we're all providing a service and we all work collaboratively and support each other to just give the customer what they need, then I'm not so sure it really matters. It doesn't in my organisation anyway. That's how I would describe it.
And Jayne, from your point of view, perhaps with the third party lens too that you touched on.
Yeah, sure. How we make this work for us is, you'll have your service management frameworks, so you're assessing performance, etc., but you have to go an extra step. So, for example, what we do within our region with our delivery centres, and we've got 2 delivery centres, we, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, we get together and we do things like, which baby picture belongs to which person, so it's that getting to know people a bit more. But we also do things about sharing and we've spent quite a bit of time building profiles for our employees, and we do it as a team rather than here's our outsourced provider doing one thing, or here's Syngenta saying, please do this. We do a lot of work around how do we work together. And then in our country teams, we also encourage them not just to stick to, here's an assessment of the service for the last month. It's also about who are we as people, who are we as individuals. And I love it when some of our country teams, when they're presenting their teams on a wider call within HR, they include our outsourced provider guys as well, and they'll have pictures of them and they see it as one team. but it's all about the relationship management. It's all about how do you build those relationships. So, you know, when we're talking about outsourced providers, you've got to be in partnership with them. It can't be, you know, there is a client-vendor relationship without a doubt, but you have to make it close to be successful. You have, you know, and then in order to achieve, you know, your delivery, your employee centricity, all that, it has to be close. And then also that helps with what type of talent do you need, because relationship management to me is fundamental in shared services now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I was actually just about to pick up on that point around relationship management, because that again came through when we had our conversations for the white paper with the 25 different shared service directors. As you said, it's all in that other bucket, relationship management. I mean, at the end of the day, HR is about people, and being a successful shared service organisation with a third party, it's all people management. It's all the softer side of that piece.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to move us on slightly again, just in terms of time, just for a small sort of 5 or so minutes, thinking about kind of the future. And the talent piece is a really nice segue to it, because one of the things that clearly we've all been adapting to, and will continue to adapt even more to now, is hybrid working. So we adapted to remote working. Now we're going to be adapting to hybrid working. So I'm curious to sort of just talk a little bit around what you think perhaps the biggest impacts of the future of work on HR shared services specifically might be. So for example, in another survey, one of the things that came out was more resilient service delivery. That was the top theme that came out. And then I think the third priority or impact was around talent, which slightly surprised me. Maybe I'm biased today because I'm a bit passionate about the talent side. But hybrid working and all of that type of thing is ultimately about talent and people. It's how do you empower people to be successful? How do we actually think about attracting, developing, retaining people, doing succession planning, thinking about that hybrid model of work, collaboration, learning, knowledge transfer, what that means for someone who's in the office, who's remote, who's in the field, loads of different things to consider. So broad brush question, from your point of view, maybe if we just ask for the one biggest impact sort of in the next 6-12 months that will help define your strategy. Val, what would that be from your point of view, thinking around the future of work for your team specifically?
I think the fact that we can do it. I think before everybody had a perception that a shared service had to be in the same room. And I'm guilty of that too, to be honest. So again, you know, COVID has allowed us to test that. I think COVID has probably digitalized the world far quicker than any other method that you could possibly think of. You know, any CIO that is loving it, because you know we're so more digitally reliant now. So I think those are the things to be thinking about. And again, for us, there is that language barrier. So we've got to continually find ways that we can adapt and understand culture in our shared service centres, because you know, take Dubai for example, they already have a culture in their own right, and then they're also dealing with Australia, dealing with Asia, you know, very, very different cultures. So for me, if I think about the future and what we're going to need and what we're going to need to do in terms of a learning perspective, it's about understanding cultures so that we can give that service and that you know, make everybody feel special, I guess. But the fact that we can do it, we've got the tools to do it now. And the only other thing I would say is that we're in danger of burnout, because people don't stop. They get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and they work right the way through, and sometimes without a break, some, you know, apart from a natural break obviously, but they don't stop to eat necessarily, or they grab a bowl of something out the fridge, and then, you know, they sit back down and they carry on working. So that's the other thing that we've got to think about, is health and well-being when we think about hybrid working and the future of work.
Yeah, and that might be part of more resilient service delivery, but it's about the people part of it. It's not just how do I deliver services that continue to be effective from a digital standpoint. It's looking after the team ultimately as part of that. So the overall resilience piece, I guess. And I see yourself nodding there, Jane. So does that resonate from kind of your point of view for the future as well?
Absolutely. I will echo what Val said, because for me, I think the biggest impact with the future of work is that it's positive. It allows us more flexibility, which before people wouldn't countenance. You always had to be in a city, in a building altogether. But actually, where we are and what we've even started to do is that we are now not restricting our shared services to Krakow in Poland. We've actually got people starting to appear in Germany. And actually, because we needed people with more German capability, actually having people and that flexibility in another country and not being located altogether means you start bringing in that cultural understanding into your shared services. So I think the biggest thing for us is the flexibility, not only in the ability to have local language, so that straight away improves your employee experience, but it covers off the understanding of what the cultures are different in the country. So I see it as very, very positive, the new ways of working.
Exciting times ahead, hopefully, for all of us. So I'm going to go to a couple of the Q&A that we've had come in, and I'm going to start with a few that are around, I guess, employee centricity that we talked about earlier, balancing costs with employee experience. So there's a few questions here just to understand, I guess, maybe what experience layers you might have in place. So that's kind of digital tools and enablers, perhaps on top of Workday. And then also, I think linked to that, maybe Val, if we touch on the point around what would you have done differently to increase adoption? Because that's a really pertinent question with any new tool that you're embedding. So perhaps, Jayne, just very briefly from your side, sort of what else do you perhaps use to help that experience piece? And then I'll ask the same question, Val, to you as well.
Yeah, I assume you mean the type of tools we're using.
Yeah, so it could be in case management, I think, from looking at the question. So if someone's interacting, aside from doing things in Workday, what else, might they use?
Yeah, so we use ServiceNow for people to engage with us, and they can engage with us either directly through a ServiceNow case, or they can telephone into our delivery centres. Obviously, in our non-delivery centres, they can still go into the HR office, where people are in there. Part of our case management system is we have smiley surveys, which we know are slightly dated now, and we're actually looking at how we're going to change understanding the employee experience after a transaction or a query. We use the smiley surveys, and I have to say in Syngenta, in the Europe and Africa Middle East region, data analytics is key. We use our data analytics to understand our volumes, where necessary processes are taking longer, to assess where do we need to look at things and focus. So when we look at employee experience, we've got that core smiley survey feedback, and we have about a 30% return rate. And we have about 2,500 cases open at any one time. And then we proactively go out as well, seeking additional feedback. So we work closely with the business partners, the COEs, and an exercise we're going through this year is holding focus groups with our line managers, employees, to look at how we can further simplify our processes and service to them and improve.
Great, thanks, Jayne. And Val, from your point of view, briefly, kind of other tools that you might use and that adoption lesson learned, that tip.
Yeah, so again, the whole purpose of us implementing Workday was so that we could decommission as many of the tools as we can, to be honest, because we did have a HRIS system, we had an applicant tracking system, we had an onboarding system, the list goes on. And so the reason why we selected Workday was because we wanted to bring that all into one system. So we've tried to have as fewer other systems as possible. The only exception to that is the case management system. So we use our IT department's case management system that's been set up just for us. It's called Avanti. But I deliberately yet haven't gone down the route of looking at how long it's taken us to close a case, how long it's taken to resolve the case, etc., etc., etc. Because that's where I think you lose the personalization and the customer centricity. Because if the shared service team are just focusing on how quickly I can close a ticket, then their behavior and their motivation is very different than if there is no pressure to close a ticket, that their behavior is more one of customer service. And how can I make sure I get this right, rather than how can I just close the ticket? So we do have a case management system, but I don't at the moment use it as traditionally as probably some shared service centres do.
Yeah, wouldn't necessarily hold yourself completely to the rigor of those. If I've met the target grade, if I've not, yeah, because it's all around the quality and the experience behind it. Yeah.
For me, the analysis comes in what tickets are being raised and why, because that gives us data around something's not right in the system, or a manager needs some training, or it gives us other data rather than it took one day to close a ticket. That's what we're more interested in. How can we remember Kaizen? How can we continuously improve the system to make it more end user friendly?
Great. And one final question, because I'm conscious that it's almost past. And like all of us, I'm sure listening, we're going to go straight on to another Zoom call. Fingers crossed, very soon we'll stop being Zoombies, or zombies, but Zoom zombies, and real people again. So very, very quickly, just because it was a really interesting question, the payroll piece, just curious to understand in 30 seconds from you both, in terms of your payroll service delivery model, I think the answer will be no. Have you got one global provider? Is there such a thing, or what does that look like? So maybe Val, just to you, and then Jayne to conclude.
Payroll's a swear word actually in our company. Banned from being spoken about. No, we don't have one global payroll provider. I don't think there really truly is one global payroll provider, because they tend to franchise out in countries that they don't have a presence. So it's something that is on our radar that we need to look at, actually, because we don't even have an integration to Workday, which is a real pain in the backside. So we probably have somewhere in the region of about 40 different payroll providers. So that's why it's a bit of a swear word in our world, and something that we are looking to not necessarily go to one payroll provider, but definitely shrink and get our hands on.
Great, thanks, Val. And from your point of view, Jayne, just to conclude.
We're hybrid. We have a global contract with a key payroll provider who service our large countries, and we have an integration from Workday through Global View into the payroll. We also then have, in the Army, I have 21 payroll providers. So we also have local payroll providers with no integration. And what we're looking at is what we can do. And for those guys who understand this, as soon as you start doing integrations and that, it becomes really complicated, and the amount of technology and management of that is huge. So we're a bit hybrid. So we have a global contract. We also have local contracts. I'm actually looking at regional contracts. So I'm looking at the moment of what can I do across the Africa countries to see, and even in Africa, and this is hot off the press, there's not one provider that can do all the countries. So we've got 18 countries on the African continent. We're probably going to look at 3 providers. So I agree, there's no such thing as global payroll provider.
Sounds to me like that could be another webinar all in itself.
Oh, yes.
Talking about payroll service delivery, the ins, the outs, all of that type of thing. If it's
Jayne,
not too bad, Val.
Jayne, we've done Africa. We'll have a call offline.
Well, I think it's probably time for me to say thank you very much both for joining us today. As with all of these webinars, it's the third one we've done just on HR shared services. Every time I've said, come to the hour, we could keep talking. I think it's fair to say that's the same today. So we will be doing another one probably in a couple of months' time, subject to TBC. But thank you so much for joining us today. And I think, Chris, we've perhaps got a little slide in case anyone wants to just download the report, anything like that, who maybe hasn't seen it before.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Indeed. I think you can see, hopefully everyone can see the QR code. So if you have a mobile phone, you can actually just hold that up. Mind you, with the last year that we've had with the NHS track and trace, we're all familiar probably of standing outside pubs when it's raining, having to hold our phones up to a QR code. So this will give you access to our white paper that you can download. Obviously, one of the key themes of one of many key things that we have within the white paper is around this Hello Business Advisor area. So please, if you haven't already, download it. As I mentioned right at the start of the section, this is a recorded webinar. So if you have had to duck in and out, or if you haven't been able to make all of it, then you can always catch this tomorrow. We will upload it onto our website in the webinar section. So you just need to go to Insights and then to the webinar section. And yeah, you'll be able to access that. We'll also have it on YouTube as well, and we'll push it out through our various social media channels as well. Ems, really, really great. Thanks very much for comparing and hosting.
Thanks, Chris. But it's mainly thanks to Val and to Jayne for sharing all their insights and being such fabulous guests to talk to you today.
Exactly. Val and Jayne, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the next webinar from Lace Partners. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks all.